Here is your WESN News on the Hour. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Cunupia man fatally shot in Minimart attack. MP Amin calls for probe into $200 million secondary roads funds. Soca Warriors face Cuba without key striker, crucial win. And internationally, missing New Zealand father and children spotted after 3 years. Now for the details. A 46-year-old Cunupia resident, Dinesh Lal, was gunned down at a minimart on Raghunan Road Tuesday the 8th around 7 p.m. A lone gunman approached Lal inside the store and opened fire, striking him several times. The attacker then fled in a white Nissan Note parked outside. Police officers from the Central Division and Homicide Bureau were called to the scene where Lal was pronounced dead. Investigations are ongoing. St. Augustine MP Khadija Amin has called for a full investigation into the $200 million allocated to the Secondary Roads Rehabilitation and Improvement Company. Speaking in the budget debate, Amin questioned why the funds meant for road repairs have not improved the condition of secondary roads across the country. She criticized the shift of funds from regional corporations to the company, citing audits, corruption claims, and unpaved roads. Amin also highlighted the issue with contractor payments, local government salaries, and a lack of funding for critical services like water distribution and dengue prevention efforts. She further demanded clarity on the $43 million recently transferred to CPEP and the reforestation program, questioning how it was used so close to the end of the fiscal year. Trinidad and Tobago's national football team is set to face Cuba on October 10th in the CONCACAF Nations League. Needing a win to avoid relegation to League B, the Soca Warriors, currently last in Group B, are under pressure to secure 3 points after a 4-0 loss to Honduras and a 0-0 draw with French Guiana. Key striker Tyrese Spicer has been ruled out due to injury, adding pressure to the team's attacking lineup. Coach Derek King and Captain Aubrey David remain focused on the task, with returning players Kevin Molino and Jovin Jones adding much-needed experience to the squad. TT will play the match on artificial turf at the Antonio Maceo Stadium in Cuba, aiming to overcome a young but determined Cuban side. Internationally, in New Zealand, Tom Phillips and his 3 children missing since December 2021 have been spotted for the first time in nearly 3 years. A group of teenage pig hunters captured footage of Phillips and his children, Ember, Maverick, and Jada, walking through the bush in the Waikato region. Phillips, armed and sporting a long beard, led his children, who were masked and carrying backpacks. Police confirmed the sighting as credible and reassuring to the children's wider family. A search was launched following the sighting, but Phillips and the children remain elusive. Authorities suspect they are being assisted by others and continuing to urge anyone with information to come forward. The children's mother expressed relief but criticized Phillips for using them as pawns and called on authorities to intensify their search efforts. Phillips is also wanted in connection with a 2022 bank robbery. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
They say that the bullying is never really about the victim, but rather it's the bully that's insecure and weak. And I find that to be an interesting premise. You see that a lot in TV shows, at least in the past, I'm not entirely sure about now, where, bullies are cowards and just need to fight back and they'll crumble and they'll scurry away. In my experience going to school, they weren't the typical stereotype bully that was just outright mean to everybody and used fear to keep people in line, at least not in my year. Ironically though, whenever there was a situation where someone was doing something along the lines of bullying, or being a bully, not like what we see in the tragic example recently, but maybe something a little less egregious. Yeah, you could stand up to them, but then it will just cause a confrontation. It's an interesting thought that, ooh, they're weak. I don't know if all bullies are weak, or at least rhetorically they might be weak. In the long run, they might be weak. But in the moment, in the short run, they're more than willing to face a confrontation or a challenge head on. And one of the quotes on that sentiment that bullies being weak goes a little bit further. It never has to do with the person they're bullying. They desperately want to be loved and accepted, and they go out of their way to make people feel unaccepted so that they are not alone. Or perhaps, maybe that's not the best way to put it. That's the poetic way to put it. That's the philosophical way to put it. But on a practical level, perhaps it's more that they want to be accepted and they feel unaccepted, so they have no qualms about paying it forward. But usually that's a phrase that is meant to imply positive sentiments. But human nature all too well, we know it. It wasn't fair for me. Why do I then now have to go out of my way to make it fair for you? It wasn't good for me. Why do I have to go out of my way to make it good for you? It wasn't nice for me. Why should I be nice for you? The problem is, to what extent has it affected how our society operates and runs? Because I will leave with this last quote and head straight to the first story of the day. We all lose when bullying and personal attacks become a substitute for genuine conversation and principled disagreement. Because the fact of the matter is, you should not expect students to be equipped with all the tools of conflict resolution and diplomacy and negotiation and compromise. Not just not having all of the academic or intellectual tools, but the emotional ones as well, in part to self-regulate as well as to identify potential emotions in the other parties in order to try to, better communicate, not enrage, not inflame. But at some point, you have to grow up and be an adult in the world. And why does it feel as though the same lackings that we might see in some of our school children, granted, if it goes too far, obviously it's not acceptable, but some amount of it existing is just natural. School children are maturing, some amount. But they're maturing in school and then potentially maturing either in college or their first job. At some point, well before the age of 60, if you should either be matured or you're never going to mature. And the thing is, how we as a society deal with disagreement. Because at the end of the day, a significant amount of bullying is, to put it very simply, a disagreement. Not the usual type of disagreement, mind you. But it's because you don't identify with the person, you don't want to identify with the person, you don't want to identify with the position or their background or the details of their personality, character, living situation, etc. But again, as we get older and mature, how we deal with these things, particularly if the responsibility that we hold is larger than others. we should be expected to do more. And maybe now, this situation is not just a bullying situation, but a society issue that goes beyond schools, because that's where it starts, but that's not where it ends. And with that, Sean Michael Small here, this is Talking Point on WESN, the Content Capsule, and now, let's start today's Daily Review. So, the Minister of Education came out and said it, and it would be easy to be cynical of her statements that, well, we have a bullying culture, right? That might seem like a cop-out because, to some extent, one of the issues with the specific situation that happened recently is the fact that speaking out did not help the issue. Bringing it to light did not help the issue. The people who ultimately are the authorities apparently, allegedly, did not do enough to stop the issue. And to some extent, that school and, to a degree, the Ministry of Education and subsequently the minister have to answer to that. Now, the minister herself is not necessarily personally responsible for every incident of bullying, but they're responsible for the overall oversight of the situation. So to some extent, there is some responsibility over every situation. But the Minister of Education, I think, this is not a cop-out when she said that there is a national culture of bullying. And she points to the fact that it's not just in schools, it's in our society as a whole. Now, the thing is, we could look at the school violence. Now, to some extent, school fights, is it bullying or is it two kids having a fight? Am I having a debate with myself on semantics? But expulsions apparently have increased, and perception is a funny thing. The minister said it increased by 467%. That seems like a whopping lot. Except, all right, it went from 17 students to 65 students, which is still a lot. It just doesn't seem as large. But that's still a lot. That's still 65 students. Now that they're expelled, what is going to happen to them? And then we have the indiscipline issues with school. And like I said, the school fights. And now, I guess you could say the concern is that with the solutions, are we equipped to deal with it? Because ever since this story hit with the unfortunate young man's death, the police are getting more complaints. And to their credit, they're not putting people away or pushing people away. What they are saying is it's very unlikely for students to come into a police station to make these reports, so parents need to step up. At the very least. And, you know, Southern Division ACP Waymeister, he has announced, I believe, he wants to roll out an anti-bullying campaign, going to start in his division and work its way, hopefully, he hopes, throughout the country. My concern is this just one more thing? Because we already wanted police officers in schools to deal with the violence. Violence between students is, I perceive it to be technically a slightly different problem to bullying. In one case, you have two groups of students or two students willing to have at it. In the other case, you have someone who potentially is not even really capable of defending themselves. And we see how far it could go. But let's go back to the whole bullying culture of the country. Earlier in the week, MP Barry Padrath said, you know, he's been the victim of bullying in Parliament. And I said, I didn't really like him saying that because I don't see the two situations as equivalent. politicians being undiplomatic and bullying in a school to the point where a student takes his own life, to me, those are not the same thing. Granted, that's not to say that he has not experienced bullying in some form in Parliament, but to bring it up now, I thought, was not necessarily the best of ideas, because again, it implies an equivalency that to me is not correct to make. But also there was another facet to him making that statement, and my co-host Keaton brought it up on Tuesday when he was with me, that, well, what is his own party doing to the five? And in fact, MP Anita Hayes came back out and I would say rightfully hit him back for it. She herself is experiencing bullying from her own party. She said that as a response. He opened the door and it allowed her to go there, to calling him a hypocrite. Now, again, while I understand why she could say what she says, it's not a situation that is as concerning to me as potentially what's going on in our schools. But then, therein lies the question, because it's something that has been expressed not so much by me, but by callers, as well as other contributors and co-hosts on Talking Point, that this politician is a bully, or that politician is a bully, or they're all bullies. And there's a part of me that never really wanted to express those sentiments because I did not feel that I was strong enough to frame it quite that way. But on the flip side, the behavior in Parliament, to what extent does it trickle down? Which leads me to the fact that, look, let's go straight to the top now. The leaders of the two political parties that are in Parliament, the Prime Minister and the opposition leader, the PM and the OL. To what extent are they setting the tone, and are they responsible for what the minister said is a national culture of bullying? My thing is, it would be easy for the supporters of either side to make the opposing political leader a scapegoat. Not to say that they may not have contributed to this phenomenon or this situation in some way. Obviously, they are the leaders, they are the examples of their members, and undecided voters will follow to some extent. They are setting the tone for their parties at the very least in Parliament, which will then inform the behavior of the members of Parliament and Senate of either side. So even if they don't have direct influence, it'll trickle down. But let's make no mistake, the minister said there's a culture of bullying. Two people in the course of, yes, it might seem like a long time, but we're talking about 15 years of them really having the reins of power over their respective parties, right? Did it start 15 years ago, 10 years ago? Is it a recent phenomenon? Or is this something that we could observe that started maybe before them? Because to some extent, if we want to say that what goes on in politics is bullying, and we want to condemn it, then to be honest, we need to look at other areas of our society where we see similar behavior. We see it with customer service reps. We see it with business people. We see it with public servants, how they act to the general public. And dare I say, if our politicians are bullies, I mean, I would admit they behave in that manner at times to each other and maybe to members of the public. But then, if we want to admit that, how about we acknowledge that if that's bullying behavior? Because it's not as though the Prime Minister and the opposition leader are literally hitting people and calling people derogatory racial slurs for no reason just because they don't like them. At times, maybe they do something with regards to in the political moments. But they don't just walk on the street, see somebody they don't like and curse them out. but they act a certain way. And it's not too dissimilar to, dare I say, how half the teachers in the country act. That's a generalization, that's an estimation, right? That's not an accurate figure. But you know what I mean. It may have been worse, or it may be just as bad now. But everybody that has gone to school, you've had teachers that you've liked, and you have teachers that you didn't necessarily like, but you didn't have strong emotions for them. And then there were the teachers who felt like they were out to get you. Wouldn't that be bullying too? And we seem, again, going back to what I said earlier, we seem to have this unfortunate human feeling of, what was good for me is good for you. What was good for me when I was in school is good for the students now. Man up, toughen up. Granted, to some extent, I understand. You have to be careful with how you raise children so that they're not mentally, emotionally weak people. You can't shelter them from everything. But there's a difference between a teacher trying to impart lessons of strength and wisdom, and when necessary, showing tough love. And then there's a difference between that and some of the behavior I'm sure many of you have experienced when you were going to school, or when you entered the workplace with your boss or your supervisor, or maybe even a co-worker. This is not a unique phenomenon, a lot of this, to TNT. There might be bullies in the police service, in the protective services. That's not unique to TNT. The thing is, this one tragedy happened, and the one silver lining is it's opened the door to the conversation. And we're not going to solve the problem perfectly and completely and eliminate bullying down to zero. Human society is so complex that it is near impossible to eliminate any problem to complete zero. But you should always be doing your best to try to achieve that. And now the question is, what are we going to do about it? Because one of the key things about bullying, in whatever form and to whatever degree it is in, is it's one thing to say that you don't like bullies. That doesn't mean anything. You have to do something about it. Because a lot of these sentiments now, that's being expressed now, granted, I get it, a lot of the people talking now didn't necessarily know, we're not in a position, but still, the environment that they encouraged played a part or has a responsibility in the death of that young man. And at the end of the day, a lot of these sentiments now ain't gonna bring him back. And it didn't have to be that severe, but the psychological damage that happens to some students. And then, what's the remedy? Well, we'll expel 65 students. Granted, they're not necessarily victims. But still, the consequences now of having people whose futures potentially are cut, and will they be brought back to the straight and narrow? I don't know. All of these things, the sentiments of just saying, oh, well, we're against bullying and we need to have anti-bullying initiatives, that's cool, but implement something meaningful. Otherwise, you're just talking smoke. The problem is, I have very little confidence that much will be done of this matter, because the bean counters in this scenario will just say, well, one death from bullying. Yeah. They are already willing to just, apparently, based on behavior, accept 600 murders a year. We're not really seeing much change there. One could argue trying to cut the murder rate from 600 to anything less than 600, less than the high 500s, would be relatively easier than to deal with a culture of bullying in our society. And the results are even more severe and more tragic than what we saw this week. And yet they're not doing anything about that. So why would they do anything about bullying? Yes, the leadership and our politicians are not wholly responsible for it, but they set the tone. They influence the culture to some degree, whatever you determine that to be. And we should be holding them, police officers, teachers, business leaders, community leaders, religious leaders, to a higher standard. But at the end of the day, we also have to look at ourselves, because all those people come from us. I want to hit the next story before we take the break. This is something that, well, we should have mentioned it yesterday when we were touching the larger issue. I didn't want to go too long without bringing it up, and that is the whole situation with Hyatt and their cashless controversy. Now, here's the thing. The long and short of it is, I could see where on a practical level, Hyatt is probably doing more cash transactions in local currency than foreign currency. Because business travelers will probably not be, yes, there might be some who work with cash, but I suspect most of them will be using credit cards. It's a general security and convenience thing. And then now, if you're a vacationer, usually vacationers spend longer times in hotels than locals. Locals just go for a weekend. Most. Vacationers from abroad, they might come for a week or more. And there's a big difference between paying cash for your weekend, which might be as little as one night, as compared to coming from abroad wanting to spend a week. Not a lot of people want to spend 2 nights in one hotel and then 2 nights in the next hotel. No, you'll spend the whole week in one hotel. And walking around with cash for that doesn't make sense. So again, you'll have a credit card. In fact, I believe in the States, for certain transactions when you're traveling, you need a credit card. They might not accept cash. So the thing is, I could see where Hyatt is being practical. And then there's the security element as well. Security-wise, there's more benefits to go cashless in local currency than foreign currency. The issue is, at the end of the day, I could see practical reasons why Hyatt made this decision. What Hyatt seemingly was not able to see is the public relations aspects of this decision and how they mentioned it. Because while there might be practical differences between, some of the concerns with foreign cash and local currency, part of it is with local currency transactions, you need to always have a float, you need to always have a certain amount of change on hand, etc., etc. And there will be safety concerns of also trying to bank this cash as well. Foreign currency might be fewer and further between. Maybe I'm wrong on that though, but I would assume that to be true. But at the end of the day, just because they're not exactly the same situation and don't have exactly the same concerns, doesn't mean that foreign cash transactions have no security concerns. Particularly when you have a public post like this, which highlights the fact that you're still accepting foreign cash, which therefore, and it might be an inaccurate signal, but it's a signal nevertheless to criminals that, hey, well, you might not be able to get local currency, but you could potentially get foreign currency. Because remember, part of it is we've seen warnings about people going to the bank and getting robbed when they come from the bank. I mean, hotel transactions generally tend to be high value. You're not renting a room for $2 a night. It'll be hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars. And that might be a tempting target. And even if there isn't a lot of foreign cash transactions, putting it out there opens the door, puts the idea into the universe for the criminals to say, maybe we should try this. But of course, more importantly, it just doesn't make sense. You lose a lot less than you would gain from keeping the foreign cash transactions open. You lose a lot less by just discarding them because, like I said, I think it's a widespread thing to mainly need credit cards to do hotel rentals and car rentals in foreign jurisdictions, because when you have a credit card on file, if the person does anything like damage the room and try to leave without paying for the damages, or takes a meal, charges it to the room and tries to skip without paying for the meal, you have the credit card on file and you could still charge them. It's a convenient thing, but it's also a security thing. Of course, there's the whole thing about disputing the charges. Yeah, I get that. But the point is you have it on file. Whereas with cash, it's easier for the customer to just disappear into the ether. And if we have those security concerns about cash, then just say no cash at all. But I think this was a case where perhaps Hyatt management was trying to be a little too cute. Because we do have foreign exchange concerns, and this is why it should have been brought up yesterday. To what extent the ministry says, well, we don't have day-to-day control, Hyatt does, but to what extent did the cashless part of it, did the foreign exchange part of it, was it influenced by government initiatives? Maybe a government suggestion, maybe, I don't know. The ministry is going to look into the currency aspect of the matter because, you know, people have basically said, look, how is it proper for you to be operating in a country and not take the local currency of the country? And at the end of the day, when people read that, why, if we're going cashless, just go all cashless. Selective cashlessness just didn't make sense to the people. It makes you wonder how tone-deaf people in ivory towers could be, or in this case, big business management. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we should be welcoming our guests. We'll be switching gears somewhat. Stay tuned. This is Talking About on WSN. We'll be right back after this.
Come travel with us as we explore Diwali across the globe. Diwali is celebrated in many countries worldwide, but do you know the traditions and practices of each nation? From Guyana to Australia, WESN presents Diwali Passport.
October 9th to October 30th, with replays on October 31st.
It's Diwali Passport, a WESN exclusive.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus. Quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
And we're back here on Talking About on WESN, and I'm joined by a special guest for a very important conversation. First time on the show, he is Mr. Christopher Jackman, a mechanical engineer by trade but also the president of the OWTU's Pointe-à-Pierre branch, here to speak, well, obviously on a big topic. Mr. Jackman, good morning. Welcome to Talking Points.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
So basically, when we discussed, the conversation we would have for the public, it's centered around Petrotrin. There's a lot with regards to Petrotrin that you want to speak about, and a lot of it, I think, is with regards to the viability and what's going on with the operations of the situation. But also including the refinery, which is the obvious thing right now. So first of all, before I get into any specific questions, I don't know if you want to open up with what are your general concerns of the situation? What has you, the leader of the branch of the OWTU, concerned with regards to Petrotrin and its subsequent successive companies?
All right, again, thank you very much for allowing me the time to share this morning, because what we really want to do is to get out there in the public domain exactly what would have taken place with respect to the closure, what is happening to the Petrotrin workers, and the way forward out of this entire situation, right? So I, as you would have said, I am the president of the OWTU Pointe-à-Pierre branch. I have to be very clear to say here today that what I speak here is not the union speaking. It is coming out of facts that we would have acquired out of the Freedom of Information process, right? So there's a lot of talk going around that you can't take the word of OWTU trade unionists, all right? But what we speak here is not only what we say, but it's what they say. So I want to deal with one of the issues first. I know the President General would have spoken to it in great detail, and I believe it's the hot topic item this morning, and that is the issue of Patriotic submitting false documents and the impression that is being given by the Energy Minister that that is the reason why we would not have been selected. All right, no, we just want to make this categorically clear that our final bid had no, in fact, I need to say this first. We have not yet seen what document he would have waived in the parliament. All right. And as such, we cannot outright defend ourselves knowing what he would have shown. But based on what he said, what he is referring to is a document that was submitted in the past and that did not form part of our bid. All right. So I need to repeat that. The document was a document that was retracted, and it did not form part of our final bid. Yet still, he has seen it necessary to go in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, wave this document around and claim that this false document was supplied and imply to the country that this is the reason why we were not selected. And that is a dangerous, dangerous lie. All right? So I don't know if you'll have further questions on that, but I want to move on to some other issues, which this whole fiasco is blinding the country to. Right? The first one is with respect to this situation of profitability. The Energy Minister, the Prime Minister, and many other members of the current government have told this country and have sold this country the lie that Petrotrin was not a profitable entity. All right, now, we would have gone back into the archives through Freedom of Information and requested from the company every year from inception of Petrotrin what was the value of profit or loss declared at the end of the fiscal year. And I am pleased to say here this afternoon that we have on record that since 1994, the inception of the company, Petrotrin has made a profit every year till the year 2008. They declared a loss for the first time in 2008 and 2009 and returned to profitability in 2010 to 2014, and then again started making losses in 2015 to its eventual closure in 2018. And the question has to be asked, what would have been the reason for those losses? we can't just say the company was a loss-making company without answering the question, what was the reason for the company making that loss? And in 2008, 2009, when we declared our first loss, the reason for that would have been two very large loans taken out by the management of the company at that time. Those loans were of the value of 850 million US dollars and 750 million US dollars, two taken out in around the same vicinity, 1 year. One of them was to facilitate the GOP upgrade. That project we actually got and saw some benefit with some plants coming online. The second loan was taken for the construction of the now infamous GTL plant. That plant has never come on stream. That plant was eventually sold, renamed Naikwan, and to this date has not come on stream. Do you have a question there?
No. Well, I mean, I think you were starting to answer my first question with regards to the discrepancy, if there was enough data for the discrepancy between the loss-making years and the profitability years, because it's interesting that, you know, one could argue the politics, the timing of the politics and the timing of the losses was similar. Now, with that said, also, we know that during the time of the People's Partnership, but also the PNM administration before, revenues were great, and they fell off, generally speaking, with the current PNM administration. I think there were signs, there were people who did have signs that I know of, even before the Keith Rowley administration was voted into office, that the winds of change were coming, unfortunately, for TNT. So we have the two loans there. One, of course, is the infamous Naikwan plant, which has its own controversies on just with where they supposedly get their supply of gas, and to the point where the founder and I guess you could say the one of the principal operators is trying to threaten legal action to get a supply of gas for what I don't know, because the ministry is not even willing to give them clearance to restart, which is an interesting thing for the Ministry of Energy to state. But so we have those two loans, one of which you said gave us some benefits, the other gave us the gas and liquid plant.
Absolutely none.
That was 1 year. Where else potentially could the losses be traced or attributed to?
Right. So coming from those two loans, it became a tremendous burden for the company now to finance that going forward. So as you rightfully said, from 2010 to 2012, the oil prices were really high, and we benefited from that during that period. But the GTL investment never bore fruit, and no one was held accountable for that investment and the financial situation that it put the company in. All right. So what ended up happening is that instead of now turning a profit, the company was forced into a mode of loss making once the oil price would have dropped below a certain value. So our emphasis now would have been forced to turn to meeting our financial obligations to fund these loans. And there's another fact that is not often told, but even though these two large loans were taken out, up to the closure of the company never once defaulted on its loans. Right? That is an important fact that we have to remember.
A quick question. Were those loans paid back before the closure, or is some of that debt still part of what is the refinery saddled with?
Very good question. So one of the loans were a bullet payment. So that payment would have become due at a certain time. The other loan was paid through installments. So at the closure of the company, that loan was over 60% completely paid off for. All right. That is a very good question. And it shows again that even though the company would have declared losses in its later years, we still had the confidence of banking institutions to have those loans refinanced. So I want to fast forward to 2018. This is the year the company closed. And in 2018, the company would have made some harsh cuts. We're talking some serious cuts here, where labor would have been reduced, where unnecessary expenditure would have been cut out. And before taxes, the company would have declared a profit of over 1.5 billion. Now, this profit would have been declared with the wage bill that a lot of people claim was the reason for the closure of the company. This profit would have been declared with oil prices hovering around $60 to $80 a barrel, right? And we're talking about an institution here that the government is selling to the country that is not profitable. And that, again, is a lie that we need to get out there. We need to get the truth out there as to what really is the case. There's also the claim that the debt would have been a severe burden to the state and that there was a risk of us defaulting and having to go to the IMF, right? No, I hear all of that, but I also hear and I also know, and this was spoken in the Hansard, that the CFO of the company in 2018, 2017 would have made request to international banks to have those debts refinanced. When the request was made to have them refinanced, there was an instruction coming directly from the Minister of Finance for him to cease and desist, right? That now would have led to the advice stating that the company is to close. I believe that would have been made in August 2018, right? So upon the closure of the company, the very same loans were refinanced under TPHL, Heritage, Paria, Guaracara refining. Now we see a situation where the refinery is closed and we've gone through 3 processes to reopen. So the question has to be asked, is the reason why this process is becoming so difficult to find a purchaser, is the reason for that because the refinery was shut down? Could it not have been easier to sell the refinery when the refinery was up and running? Would it not have been better to keep an entity that is proven profitable up and running under a situation where you restructure and you reorganize the institution and then offer a process to sell, which would be a lot more palatable to buyers and would be a lot more easy to see? Now we face a situation where billions of dollars and 100 years of history could be lost because of a rash decision to shut down a profitable entity.
Well,
right?
I want to ask with regards to the losses of Petrotrin, because I think the most recent statement on this from a member of the government was that the losses were in the US. To what extent do you know that to be true? Because while I understand, yes, if we were buying the oil to refine, that would have been in foreign currency. But a lot of the operational costs were not necessarily paid in foreign currency. I don't think salaries were paid in US dollars, right?
That is correct.
So were the losses, were they technically in foreign currency? Did they have to be experienced in foreign currency, or was it local currency? And the reason why I ask that is one of the things both guests and I think callers of Talking Point have brought up, which I think is a valid point, is even if we're making some losses or breaking even, the potential, if the losses are in local currency but we're still earning foreign exchange, it still is a benefit to our foreign exchange position. And shutting down the refinery could have hastened that other part of the economy, the other side of the equation that the energy sector is mostly responsible for, that's leaving us in a bad spot. So how true is that the losses were in foreign currency or not?
All right, so let me call some figures here. So for the year, the largest loss that would have been declared here, and again, this is through freedom of information. So I just want to show you guys here. This is information that we have year by year. So the largest loss would have been declared in 2016, and that was a loss of in excess of $5 billion, right? So there's no doubt that it was a large loss and it required serious intervention. Now, the business of refining involves importation of crude, refining of products, and selling at a margin. So when we buy and resell, the intention is to make a profit. Now, in this case, most of the expenses incurred will definitely be in US dollars because our largest cost for import will be US dollars, right? But our margins, and this is the real issue here with respect to refining. Our margin fluctuates not based on oil price. Our margin fluctuates based on the price of the products that we export, right? So you can have an oil price of $100 a barrel, but you're selling gasoline and you're selling your refined products for $1 plus 50 cents extra US. I'm just using a hypothetical figure.
Yeah.
Where we make our profit will be on that markup, all right? So if for some reason we can't make an export, we lose that money. And you'll appreciate that those losses will be in very, very large quantities of US dollars. So with respect to wages, with respect to sales in the local market, yes, those are strictly TT dollars. And we end up losing those funds anyhow. But most of the exports that we do would be in US. So there's a potential for losses to be in US as well as in TT. But all that being said, the refinery was a significant contributor to the GDP of the country, as well as a significant earner of foreign exchange on the whole. That can't be denied. That is there in the TTEITI reports. That has been acknowledged by the minister, the current minister of finance, right? And we have him on video as well admitting that.
Well, so I guess one of the things that concerns me over this whole situation is how much accounting matters when where you put the figures. Not actually where the money is lost, but where you put the figures to make it look like the money is gone. Now, with that said, you mentioned 2 loans before which were not, neither of them were fully paid off. I think one you said had a future repayment, so I guess I'm assuming that meant that 100% of it was still up in the air at the time this whole thing happened.
That is correct.
Now, there also was the whole severance packages of Petrochem when they restructured. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that they used the refinery as collateral for the debt to finance some of the restructuring of Petrochem into the current models to pay off some of the severance packages. Is that correct?
No, I'm not aware of that. From what the Prime Minister would have said, and I have to go on what he said, he would have said that cost would have been borne by the taxpayer. Okay. So he quoted a figure of $2.4, I believe, billion that was used to pay severance payments. What I can say is that even though that is the figure that he quoted, there's significant amount of liability still owed to the Petrochem workers, right? So while 2.4 billion, a decision like this has cost this country a significant amount of money and will continue to do so. We currently have a lot of liabilities, one being the Petrochem pension plan that I also would like to, if you would allow me, to speak to today, because it is a situation that can affect the lives of thousands of ex-Petrochem workers. All right? Can I proceed with the pension plan?
Yeah, because this is not the current or recently passed employees. This includes people who were potentially removed from a lot of this situation, who are just watching their I can't even say their livelihood, but their survival go up in the air and hopefully not disappear in smoke.
Hopefully not disappear in smoke. All right, so here's the current situation with the plan. The Petrochem pension plan is the single largest pension plan in probably the Western Hemisphere, or the Caribbean, I should say. Right? This plan would have comprised a lot of local investments as well as international investments. At the time of closure, the plan was valued over $9 billion. It currently stands at just short of $7 billion. If the plan has to meet all its financial obligations, as in every member of the plan who contributed, getting their minimum requirement, the plan currently has a deficit of in excess of $4.1 billion. That would mean that $4.1 billion will not be paid to persons who are currently entitled to it, right? With every passing quarter, the plan diminishes by approximately $100 million. So at $6.9 billion, and we're talking loss of 400 million a year. The plan is currently not carded to pass 2040. Now, what does this mean? This means that we have in excess of currently 7,000 members of that plan that currently face the prospect of the plan being wound up before 2040. Now, when I said 2040 as the date, that is the date where all funds will be exhausted. What normally happens with pension plans is that before it reaches that time, a decision is taken to wind it up. And when I say wind up, that means the plan is closed and whatever remaining funds is equally distributed to each member. And from that point forward, members of the plan will no longer be receiving a pension. Now, this pension plan is legally guaranteed via the rules of the plan, the trust deed and rules. So any shortfall in the plan must be covered by the parent company. Now, some would argue that the company has now closed, but there's a Petrotrin legacy, and even before closure, there would have been a deficit on the plan that needed to be addressed. So the union right now is the only institution that has taken up a legal challenge to hold the corporation sole and the company accountable and to inject the required funds into the plan. But every passing year, according to the statements produced by Bacon and Woodrow, which is the actuary, they would have recommended that approximately $100 to $200 million be injected into the plan every year for 10 years to address the deficit. The government is aware of this, and they have to this date not injected a cent into the plan. In fact, the avenue that they have chosen to go is to pay us a separate entity, a separate actuary, to prepare a report stating that there's no deficit in the plan. But that report is done on the assumption that the plan, the investments on the plan generates unrealistic interest rates above 6%. And from what we have seen on the financial performance of the plan, that is absolutely not what is happening. So they know very well they have produced a report that is reflecting unrealistic expectations, and they are trying to use that to hide behind the current ignorance of meeting the debt obligations on the plan. So this is something that, if is allowed to happen, we face a prospect of persons now going from receiving their monthly pension to now having to face the possibility of going back to NIS alone, right? And I'm sure that that will result in the pauperization and the death of thousands.
Yes, I think cynics might say, well, other people have to do it, but just because other people have to do it doesn't make it right or palatable, or there's a whole lot to unpack here, because obviously I would assume that this could have been potentially solved somewhat, not completely, by the fact that if Petrotrin continued, current workers would have been paying into the plan, and it would have given more time to try to find a long-term solution as opposed to where we are now. And yes, I assume Paria, Heritage, and what have you, that's been divorced from this situation. Is that correct?
Yeah, what we also have to look at too, to add to that, even if the company was closed, there are other solutions. This is a legacy issue. This is an issue that they are responsible for, they are entitled to pay. And for example, if the matters we have before the courts are won, the institution that will be required to pay will be Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited. So one potential solution is for them, the company itself, whether through Heritage or Paria, to inject the required funds into the plan, right? It is a legacy issue. It is a legacy issue that has come about out of the closure of the company. And that is the most logical solution to address the issue, right? Yet still, it seems as though they prefer to go down the road of ignoring it and winding up the plan at the required time when it becomes too big a problem to resolve. That is the road we are currently on.
I would hazard, I guess, that you are 100% right, because what I have seen currently right now is the only thing with regards to a strategy or plan or motivation or intention that we see from the government is expenditure control. And that does not necessarily mean that it's smart decisions of expenditure control, just that it is expenditure. And to be somewhat fair, there's a lot of things that are needed and probably not enough money for all of them. But as you pointed out, they are somewhat responsible for this situation directly, as opposed to other situations. A quick question on the refinery. Is the debt that still exists, is it saddled to the refinery, and is that also making the sale of the refinery difficult?
Right, that's a very good question. So as far as we know, when Patriotic Energies would have made the first attempt to purchase the asset, there was a big issue created with the lien, and the lien was directly attributed to these loans, loans that would have been taken out. As far as I'm aware, that has now been transferred to Heritage. All right, so the fact that it has been transferred to Heritage, the lien no longer exists, and there should potentially not be an issue to have the asset sold.
So now it's just a matter of the age of the refinery now working against it, or rather how long it's been left in mothballs or not operating. It has made that situation has gotten worse, even though the loan situation has gotten better.
Yes, and again, the main question here is that this asset is not a parlor on the side of the road. This is a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment where we saw expenditure happening just very recently with the GOP upgrade that is now being allowed to corrode and rust away. Now, yes, there's a level of preservation works being done, but pumping nitrogen into these assets alone is not enough, and that will only last so long. I believe when the preservation plan was put out, it was never catered to last this long. This level of preservation that was done did not have the intention of preserving this asset for 6 years plus. Right, so there will be a level of deterioration taking place there, and some of the plants will be very, very difficult to restart if this is allowed to go on for much longer.
I'm not too sure if you could speak on this, but I want to switch gears while we still have time, because what happened with Paria and the 4 divers, people have expressed, including directly on this show, or mainly I get it from callers on this show, that there was a situation where a lot of long-term employees, highly skilled employees from Petrotrin, highly skilled employees, they were potentially kind of moved out, and lesser qualified individuals might have come in. And I don't know, again, you're part of the union, I understand if there's certain things you may not be able to speak about, but do you have concerns that, well, I mean, to put it bluntly, that we may not necessarily, let me rephrase, we could potentially see what we've seen with Paria happen again because of that. And also, with the general operations in our energy sector with regards to things like Heritage and Paria, if that was something that the government did that was widespread enough that it's also impacting operations, potentially even impacting technical advice with regards to how to deal with the refinery?
That's an interesting one that you brought up there. I can't speak to this issue. I just want to say that a week before that incident occurred, I would have been out on number 6 berth, all right, doing some work with respect to some other assets, right, and spoke to some of the guys who ended up dying in that pipeline before they passed. Now, just within the period of time where Paria was existing, which would be from 2018 to present, without the union's presence there would have been a lot of incidents taking place that were not brought out into the public domain, right? And I have to take some responsibility for that. It's not directly our fault, as in we were put out of the institution, so we don't have a direct line of sight. But there would have been certain persons, and I want to give 2 examples. This is before the incident with the 4 divers, right? There would have been an incident where a worker would have been there working on a jetty. And while doing work on a pipeline, a 12-inch pipeline, a spool would have fell onto his foot and severed his leg clean off, right? Now, that is an issue that you would think OSH would be raising, that you would think questions would be asked as to how that could be allowed to happen. And that was kept quiet, right? There was another issue very close to the issue with the divers in terms of time, where there was an explosion at number 3 berth that through the explosion ended up throwing 2 to 3 persons into the water. And one of the very same divers that died in the pipeline had to enter the water to save the lives of persons that were unconscious underwater, right? So we have these incidents occurring, but now, because persons are afraid to lose their jobs, because there's not the cover and protection of a union, and because persons are being employed on these labor supply contracts where they are being kept on contract forever, they are now afraid to come out and speak, right? And if someone would have spoken prior to, with those other 2 incidents, there's a possibility that the lives of those 4 divers could have been saved. So we will never again allow an incident to occur without bringing it into the public domain. And what I see now occurring in Paria is, even after all of this loss of life, even after hiring persons who were not qualified and not aware of the risks of the jobs that they were doing, they still proceed to do so by currently hiring high-level management persons who don't have the requisite qualifications required to come out there and work in that high-risk environment. That is still taking place to this day. They have not learned their lesson. And I am 100% certain that if the OWTU was still operating inside of there, the amount of incidents, the amount of loss of life would be significantly reduced. Again, because we hold them accountable, right? That is what is lacking inside of there right now.
A quick question before we end this part of the show.
Yeah.
One of the things that also came out after the refinery was closed, well, now we have to import bitumen. Now,
Yes.
how true is it that the refinery was providing us with the bitumen we needed for road repair, so we didn't have to spend foreign exchange to import it? And were there any other, I guess you could say, secondary benefits or byproducts that we benefited producing it here and not having to import it? Because this also affects the foreign exchange situation.
Correct. Right. So, well, the main thing is fuel security. So we would have had the ability to produce our own fuel, right? Now, let's say, for example, a war breaks out in Trinidad and Tobago, heaven help us. Because with the fluctuating fuel prices on the market, we are now open to that. So we also have the situation with bitumen, which we now have to import. We also have, I don't know if you can remember as well, this was brought up back then, the supply of regular gas. Regular gas was a commodity that was very appealing to fishermen because it was low cost and it allowed them to maintain a low price of fish on the market. So all of these products, we also have the production of acid, which was done at the Point-A-Pay refinery. And we also have the production of sulfur, which was also done at the Point-A-Pay refinery. Now, we don't really have much use for sulfur in the local market. We used to export that, but the exportation of sulfur would have brought in precious foreign exchange, right? Now, as well, with the acid that we used to produce, that product never used to be exported, but it supplied the needs of the local market. And now, those products will also have to be imported. So shutting down of the refinery itself would have impacted the road sector, the fisherman sector. It would have impacted the use of acid within our local industry. It would have impacted our export of sulfur products, as well as the importation of the fuels for our local market. And all by one decision.
And to the best that you know, right? Not or to your opinion on this.
Yeah.
Was those things taken into account? Because I could understand, okay, it's making a loss, maybe it's making too much of a loss, we shut it down. But then you should have, if you were responsible, account for what about the other benefits? So the other benefits financially, you know, that contribution could potentially have, even if the refinery is making up losses that were too much, those other benefits financially could have made up for it. And I mean, I guess once the refinery's overall situation was like neutral, the benefits would have outweighed the cost in my mind, right? So do you get a sense that they took all of these secondary industries and products into account? Or were there blinders on and it's like, well, we're just, I mean, dare I say they wanted an outcome, so they kind of went in the course or the perspective that got them the outcome? Or were they just blissfully ignorant to the fact that, hey, it's more than just oil, refined products for gas that's coming out of this refinery?
It's interesting because the answer to that question lies in what is the reason for shutting it down, right? And I don't think the country would have received a well thought out response to that answer to this day, right? I am of the opinion that, and this is based on the facts that we have, that the company did not have to be shut down. There was an agreement between the union and the management of the organization to restructure and to do what was necessary to return the company to a profitable environment. That agreement was signed off by the union via a memorandum of agreement, right? And that rug was pulled from under us in August of 2018 when they declared that they were getting out of the refining business. Now, when we were told that a presentation was done to convince us that they were making the right decision, that presentation comprised of 3 slides with minimal data, right? So I'm convinced that not enough work was done to justify that decision. In fact, as was said many a times to this day, there was no report, there was no study, there was nothing produced that recommended the shutting down of the asset. And if in 2018, before the closure, it was shown that the company was able to declare a profit in excess of $1.5 billion after going through a process of making adjustments, there can be no one to say that that was the right decision. There could be no one to say that this was thought through properly, especially now with them making the statement that they're trying to get it restarted. And now, even though then they were saying they wanted to get out of the refining business, now they are even saying that they may be partially involved again in the refining business. So the whole story just keeps changing. The bottom line is they did not have to make this decision.
I do need to ask one question, because my stance on the refinery, when I started Talking Point, is even different from my stance before talking to you, to be honest, right? After speaking to some various people, some of the callers, you know, I softened my stance a bit, started to wonder to what extent was the refinery, was it necessary for it to shut down, even if it was making a loss. But initially, my opinion was informed by what I saw in the papers. And correct me if I'm wrong, it was almost like if there were 3 years of negotiations between the PNM and the union from before it was shut down, right? So I'm just doing this, I guess you could say, not to push fire, but to kind of be complete, right? Do you think that the union potentially overplayed its hand? Or was the government, do you think, potentially just kind of making things difficult and potentially in the long run, they weren't necessarily negotiating in good faith? Because I do think that I initially did think the union potentially overplayed its hand and the government was backed in a corner and was doing something that was unpopular. That's why I think the government was backed in a corner. I don't give the government credit for making some tough decision to close down Petrochin. Potentially, they felt that they had to do it, and that's why I thought, well, the union may have overplayed its hand in this situation. But after speaking to you and others, it seems as though even if the government thought that in good faith, they might have still been irresponsible with how they got to that conclusion. What are your thoughts on that?
Exactly. And just to emphasize again, remember, we signed a memorandum of agreement to agree to work together to restructure the organization, because we will not say that the company had no issues. To declare a $5 billion loss, something has to be wrong, right? And while we know the genesis of that loss and where it would have come from in 2008, 2009, we knew it could not be business as usual. So we agreed to work together with them, and that rug was pulled from under us in August 2018, where a decision was made today for tomorrow. And from that point, we were on the defensive. So, as you rightfully said, I don't know if you remember when the decision was first made, and I believe it was on Republic or Independence Day that the Prime Minister would have said that he will offer the union, the refinery on premium terms, first preference, all kind of words. And originally, our President General would have responded by saying no, because his intention was that we want to keep the asset up and running. The asset should not be shut down. But they were insistent on proceeding. They were not willing to negotiate. We took them to court, and even the court found them guilty of failing to meet and treat with the union prior to the closure. So we continued. We tried the patriotic option for years. We tried talking with them for years. We have matter before the court for years now. No progress. And that is the reason why we have made the decision that going forward, the PNM and their policies are not in the best interests of the expatriate workers. And I would go as far as to say they are not in the best interests of workers in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is why we are currently on the stance that we are. We have tried, we have discussed, we have negotiated, and it has not been done in good faith.
Well,
right? No one can say that we have not tried.
Yeah. I almost feel like we could go on further, but I do need to now take the time. You could stay for calls. I just want to reconfirm.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, folks, Mr. Jackman is willing to take calls from the public. You could also potentially call in on other things, but obviously time is limited and we're not going to have Mr. Jackman every day. So for what is, I would imagine, to be one of the most important economic issues in the country, you could call in, have your say, or ask your questions. Just please be respectful. Note that this is not a politician that's here for Pekong, right? Let me just put it that straightforward. And with that said, the phone lines are open. We'll see if we have any callers because we're kind of late with opening phone lines. I'll just say this, you have successfully convinced me at least to move away from some of my positions or preconceived notions with regards to maybe labor and the OWTU in general, because you gave us a lot of details, and generally speaking, that's what I need. If you leave people without a lot of details to speculate on their own, it kind of looks bad, right? I mean, government doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. I don't necessarily give the unions the benefit of the doubt, but when I do get details from the unions, I'm willing to accept it. And I've changed my stance, not just on the OWTU today, but with other unions in the past. So I thank you for that. We have Mova on the line. Good morning, caller, you on here? Caller, good morning.
Good morning to the panel. And that is what we need. We need clarity. And I believe that Mr. Jackman has presented the clarity that the country needs to hear. What could have been done if the refining didn't have to shut down, right? And at last, for the clarity we have that has been put out this morning by Mr. Jackman, and also Sean, thanks for this information that you have brought to us this morning. And I know that once the refinery comes into the hands of patriotic, the country would benefit. They will open the company to have the people to buy shares and become owners when the company stabilizes, and it will be great for Trinidad and Tobago, for the people and the concerned about the people. They are the only company that has that type of proposal. I will say the bid is a bid for Trinidad and Tobago, is a bid for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. We have another caller from Chaguanas. Good morning, caller. You on here?
Morning, gentlemen.
Morning, morning.
Morning.
I must congratulate you on your guest. You're extremely knowledgeable on the subject. And although I have heard most of what he said, there have been different people who put in a little bit. There was one thing I didn't hear him mention, and that all these loss-making things was the brainchild of, I think, the chairman of the board. And at the time, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Energy warned against it. And he was transferred to the Ministry of Work. Now, this was a man who is a lecturer on petroleum engineering, who came through the ranks in the petroleum industry. And he was transferred to the Ministry of Work. And in my opinion, that is the real reason behind it. Because when the government changed and they tried to put the guy who was responsible, the then chairman of the board, in court for this matter, when the Georgia government changed back, they withdraw the matter. I would like to hear his view. If
that is correct.
It's correct. Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Yes. Yes. In 2008, 2009, the decision was made by the then chairman of the board, right? We have heard many times the union crying the name Malcolm Jones and his connections to making some decisions that at the end of the day ultimately caused the closure of the company, right? And we need to be brave enough to say that this was not, the company didn't suffer and close because of the wages of workers. It didn't suffer and close because of productivity. It suffered and closed because of a debt burden that was placed on the company that it could not bear at the oil prices that it faced, right? And that is the truth.
Well, so I don't know if you could speak on this, but the wider implication, because Nikwan also seems as though it's some form of political favoritism, for lack of a better way to put it, that, you know, we were questioning, why is this project like a golden child when it initially started, which made the whole situation even worse, because you have two industrial accidents, one guy dies, the plant can't stay open for a whole year, right? And it reached the point where it couldn't pay its bills. And the one good thing is the fact that, I would argue, relatively quickly, the government realized, hey, we might need to rethink this situation. But at that point, I do wonder if some amount of damage to our upstream or downstream industries due to a lack of natural gas, et cetera, I don't know how reversible it was. Is there an issue with that, with people who have the correct politics, who are politically reliable or loyal, getting these positions, and they're not just with regards to Mr. Jones, but maybe with regards to Nikwan, maybe with regards to the board of Paria, just to say in general, that we have this issue. They're getting these high power positions, they're not necessarily qualified, and we're seeing the results of poor management.
Yes. Yeah, the sad part about it is that it impacts the lives of thousands of people. It impacts communities. And again, nobody is held responsible. Because of the closure of the asset now, we have a multi-billion-dollar asset rusting away. We have medical facilities corroding. We have bungalows falling down. We have sports and facilities falling apart, and nobody is being held accountable for millions and millions of dollars in losses.
That's a good point. I need to ask this. It's not just the refinery alone. The refinery spawned a community that supported the refinery. It's not a set of people working on this thing in the desert, you know, and you need to take a train to and from work hundreds of miles. You need to have, you know, when there's an army base, when there's a factory, there's a community around it to support it, right, for day-to-day life so that people could actually function. To what extent have we even considered the cost of trying to put these things back together? Because, like you said, even the sporting facilities, we might take that for granted, but look, at the end of the day, they were there for a reason. The community is falling apart, as is acknowledged, but we're not necessarily accounting the fact that, all right, but to get the workers and to get the refinery back restarted and to get things moving again, that all has to be built up back, potentially from scratch.
Yeah, and they're trying now. We've seen some announcements where they want to revamp some facilities. I believe they're using the Augustus Lung Hospital now as a oncology center, or at least trying to, right? But at the end of the day, we didn't have to be here, and at the end of the day, no one is being held accountable for this, and this continues to happen. We see it happen with Mittal. Mittal is falling apart. We see it happen with the facilities at Caroni. And this is the impact that officials in government have when they make decisions like this. These things going forward need to be properly thought out. The impact on the country, not only the citizens, the economy, the communities, the livelihood, sports, needs to be properly thought out before somebody takes these rash actions. It is really sad that the country would have gone through this level of damage. Shutting down the refinery has basically crippled the culture of South Trinidad. And nobody is being held accountable for that.
One thing I do want to ask, because also the government has brought up the fact that the refinery to operate, it needs a supply of oil. Has Patriotic done any due diligence to figure out where they could source it? If their bid wins, well, we'll see how this whole thing turns out now with the three preferred vendors. Has Patriotic bid also included sourcing a supplier or potential, who might be potential suppliers?
Yes, the part of the bid that was submitted, part of the requirements were that we would have also had to state and supply a supplier for crude. And as you brought that topic up, I also want to state categorically here today that even though crude has been made into a big issue by the utterances of the regime, the refinery, since Texaco days, we're not even talking Petrotrin here, since Texaco days, have always been importing crude oil.
Right.
The crude produced in Trinidad and Tobago was never of the quantity that would be quantity and quality to be sufficient enough to run the refinery on its own. Right? So to tell the country that the problem with the refinery was that we had to import crude, that is also an untruth.
Well, sorry, but we do have a caller on the line from San Fernando. Good morning, caller. You on the air? Caller, good morning.
Good morning, John.
Good morning.
And good morning to your guests. Let me state my position as I always stated with you, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree with the shutting down of the refinery. Now, because of the state of that entity, because of the way it was managed, the amount of corruption that was involved in it, and the complicity of the union in all of this. And I say complicity of the union in all of this. Now, whether should the refinery have been started back by the state? Yes. Sometimes you have to break something to build it back. And that is where the state fell short in not restarting the refinery as a different entity under a different management, where they could have sifted out all that crap that was going on inside of there. But the refinery was making a loss. And there is, your guest provided some information on the Freedom of Information Act. I want to let your guests know, in the petroleum industry, there are a lot of what they call creative accounting. I worked for 2 international oil companies, and creative accounting is sometimes employed to make the company, depending on the decision of the upper management, how they want things to appear. You can hide, you can put away losses and let it stay in suspense there for quite a while, for years if you want to. You could write off stuff, you could write it back on. There are a lot of things that can be done. And my issue is, the Patriotic had allowed them, not Patriotic, let me not go there. Let me say, the union, the UWTU, the bluff was called. They, and I understand that they had the MOU, but they had pushed a government that just not too long came into power, and was scared of what could have taken place. So they shut the refinery down. The intention was, there was no ill intent as far as I'm concerned. It was scared people who didn't have enough technical skills, and they shut the refinery down. The refinery should have been reopened by now, under the state, under a different management structure with at least 25% of the staff that they had. 75% of the staff was not needed in that refinery. It was not needed. And we have reached a stage where we are now. Now, let me say this. When you're making a loss, and the argument was they were making a loss, but they were earning foreign exchange. A loss is a loss. At the end of the day, it is making a loss. And you can't be doing this and hemorrhaging money all the time, and somebody has to pay for this. Somebody had to pay for it, and it was the Treasury. Now, I will agree with the gentleman that there have been some anomalies with that pension plan. There is no reason why the pension plan should be in the state it is. And that is a direct fault of the company. And creative accounting as well, and I will say this, creative accounting. Because the company has interfered with that pension plan, hence the reason why it's in the state it is now. Because those people's pension should be guaranteed for life. But there were things done inside of there. I'm saying that. I am glad that Patriotic, UWTU has sent somebody with a level head to speak on a level basis instead of all the hype and stuff. What upset me with something that he said, let me say this quickly, Sean.
Quick.
Is when he talked about those two incidents at Paria. The one where the guy foot was severed and the other explosion. How come we are now hearing this? And these are the things that when it is that they have the information, but they are playing coy. And now this is something. Have you ever heard of this, Sean, before?
No.
I'm sure not.
No.
Exactly. And this is the thing. You can't. As they say, you want to play mass. You will have to Patriotic and Patriotic have to decide. I'm not Patriotic and OWT have to decide what they want. Now, this last thing with this financing and the minister coming out with this documentation, I can tell you, Sean, that is a ruse. That is because this is now politics, and the TNM government does not want Patriotic/OWTU to get that refinery in their hands. So this is now politics here. They're playing politics now. But this is all part of what Trinidad and Tobago has become. I'm sorry to say. But as I said, I maintain the refinery should have been shut down but reopened.
Okay.
Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. Mr. Jackman, we have very limited time, but I should give you a chance to respond at least to some of what.
Completely. He believes that
on the refinery,
because of corruption and because of a person being scared, that is sufficient reason to shut an entity down. If that is the case, then we should shut down every state enterprise in Trinidad and Tobago. Right? There's no entity in Trinidad and Tobago, I believe, right now, free of corruption, mismanagement, and that doesn't require some sort of serious intervention. So I don't buy that. Right? With respect to the point that he raised with the incidents occurring, the previous incidents, right? We would have definitely spoke about the one with the person losing their leg, right? The explosion only came to our attention after the situation with the divers, because it was only at that point in time persons would have come forward with the information stating that these things would have been occurring, right? But you have to understand that as the trade union, we don't have a voice on level of the state. When that issue occurred with the divers, there was a very strong possibility that the same could happen again if it was just us speaking. But the situation was so dire in terms of so unbelievably bad that many persons came together, and we thank God that that actual incident got that level of coverage.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the situation with Alan Leal at the Nike One plant, he would have also lost his life. And everybody would have been aware of it, but to this day, persons don't know the extent of the story behind it, right? So again, we would have vocalized it, but our voice is smothered many a times. So let us keep that as well in mind.
Well, Mr. Jackman, I'm sorry, but we do have to close.
No problem, no problem.
But thank you for coming. I understand where you're coming from. I'll just say this. I do agree with the last caller's sentiment that, yeah, it could have been that the politicians were scared and they didn't have the expertise to make the decisions that they thought were good decisions at the time. But I also understand where you're coming from. And dare I say, I'll meet in the middle. Maybe it needed restructuring, but not necessarily to close down per se. So, of course, you could get technical with, well, how long and the shutdown and what constitutes closing down and what have you, right? I will disagree with the caller, though. I do think that even if it costs us more, if it's TT losses, the foreign exchange and what it does for the economy, because that's what the economy is based off of, it might have been worth the cost, right? And that's where deeper analysis, which might never come to fruition because all of the information may not be easily available. That's just the reality. That's just one of the common things in TNT. Not enough information, not enough analysis, not enough critical thinking. But Mr. Jackman, thank you for joining me once again. And thanks to all of our callers for calling in and voicing their opinions. Good discussions, because, hey, these discussions on this topic in particular inform me, and it's causing me to rethink my assumptions and my positions, which I have done at this point multiple times on this issue. It's an important one, and perhaps it needs even more light being shed upon it. So, folks, with that said, please stay safe out there. Make today a good day, as my co-host, Mr. Shah, would always say. Remember your allegiance to each other and to the Republic, and try to be more informed. Try to put some time into being more informed on this and many other issues. We will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Yeah, it was very good, man.
WESN.
Come travel with us as we explore Diwali across the globe. Diwali is celebrated in many countries worldwide, but do you know the traditions and practices of each nation? From Guyana to Australia, WESN presents Diwali Passport.
October 9th to October 30th, with replays on October 31st.
It's Diwali Passport, a WESN exclusive.